Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the All Things Interesting podcast, where I interview interesting people from a wide variety of backgrounds to understand their unique stories. On this episode of the show, I am joined by lead 3D artist Kim Aava. Kim Aava joins the show to talk about her experience as a game designer, working in the game design industry, and talking about what it is like to work as a 3D artist. I think this topic will be interesting for many of those out there who are interested in game development and specifically getting into the field of game design. As always, if you enjoyed this episode or the show, feel free to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Overcast, or your preferred podcast platform and leave a message. So, without further ado, please welcome my guest, Kim Aava. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the show, Kim. I'm glad to have you on the All Things Interesting podcast, especially since growing up, I've had a fascination with game design and 3D art development, and I've had the opportunity to develop modifications to games in the past. So I've had some experience with 3D art development, and this is a conversation that I have been looking forward to having. So thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I saw your podcast and it seems like you have a lot of different people on and it looks really interesting. So I've been listening to a few of them myself the past week. So
awesome. I mean, it's basically what the podcast is, just interviewing interesting people. And I find what you do as a 3D artist working at DICE in Stockholm, Sweden to be very interesting. And you've worked on games such as Battlefield 5 as well as Horizon Zero Dawn. What would you say has been kind of the journey that led you up to this point?
Well, I guess it depends on where you would like to start, but I also had a fascination with games since I was a kid. So I guess it all started when I was very young in a way. And my parents used to play a lot of games. I know that they played Zelda together on the NES, and then my dad was also playing Tomb Raider on PlayStation. So I guess in a sense was introduced to games very early on and grew to love them myself. But the journey itself has been very mixed. I always knew I wanted to work with game in one way or another. It's just that I had no idea really what that meant or that you could have different roles. And I guess in a sense I thought programming was going to be my way to get a job, and that's
right.
How you make games in my oblivious youth. Because making games today is much different than making games back in the day as well. There's a lot of more systems and advanced and more people being involved in game development, compared to back in the day, where you also have tech limitations and stuff. So it's been changing a lot as well, where you're now currently more specialized in an area or field, and before you were more a generalist doing a bit of everything. So for
was there something specific about art that kind of drew you to that over the other areas of game development?
No, because honestly I have no idea how to draw, and I still don't know how to draw. And I was actually going into programming at first, and it started with me doing HTML code, doing websites just for fun, making fan websites as a kid. But there was a lot of animation running, and in particular I loved Sailor Moon, so I made a Sailor Moon website. And that's kind of where it started with code. And then I thought, well, hey, this is pretty easy. But then I realized that HTML is just one of the languages, and it's not as advanced as like C++ and things. So once I actually started a high school, I went into like the tech, I guess, course that you can take. You can specialize in high school in Sweden. So I was like, oh, tech, I'm gonna become a game designer or coder.
Is that common in Sweden? I mean, is it common in Sweden for high schools to offer a lot of tech-related courses related to gaming?
Nowadays it is, but when I was in high school, it was more like tech in general tech rather than like games. But now it's pretty common that you can do something. Like there are some high schools that have like the gaming, I guess, part or program that you can follow. And I don't really know that much how applicable it is, because it's high school and most people get in from other types of education or self-taught. But so I'm not really sure how it looks like for someone from high school today to get into the industry. But I took a general tech course, but I failed quite hard, so I had to change basically to. I started reading languages instead, and in particular like Japanese and Chinese, because I thought, well, that's where they make the games. I didn't really do that much research about what actually is here in Sweden at that point, because I realized much later that the industry for games are very big in Sweden, and in particular in Stockholm. So it took a while for me to reach that point. And I was still going deep diving into codes, but, well, after a while I realized that, coding is not my thing. And that's when I found like a university program for game design. And game design is also quite different from like 3D art. So like the fast answer for like how I became a 3D artist is that it just happened. I kind of stumbled into 3D art. At like the last year of university. That's why I was like, oh, what's this? And it was pretty fun. And 3D art is quite technical. It's still artistic, but it's like technical artistic in a way. So
compare to programming, and I've taken a couple of programming classes in university, and it was definitely not my wheelhouse. But what would you say is very technical about 3D art compared to programming?
Well, I mean, programming, it's a lot of like, I guess, logical thinking. Like programming is almost like, learning a language, but you still have to do math, in my opinion. It might not be that way, but that's how I kind of experienced it. But 3D, like, you don't code the tools you're using or the softwares. The softwares are there, but it's still like you're creating things in a 3D space. So it's much different from like, drawing. But it's not like you're coding anything. You can, of course, in the softwares if you want to. But I don't really do that myself. So I guess the technical point then is that it's like, it can be hard to wrap your head around the three-dimensional space, but then also like you have the UV mapping, which is like how you actually apply textures in the end to make it look like a brick wall. And you also have like destruction, maybe if you're gonna have that in the game, that stuff breaks, and that's also like the more technical part of it to actually make that work. And then you have like topology, the flow of the vertices, which you're actually part of the 3D mesh. So it's like, it can be more advanced if you like, but it can also be quite simple to make 3D. And it's increasingly becoming more and more simple to make 3D because there's so much more, I guess, tutorials on the internet, but also the softwares themselves are becoming more easy.
Right.
So there's like the softwares nowadays where like you had to do a lot of things manually that could take you a couple of hours is now like 3 or 2 like button clicks. So yeah, it's becoming easier.
I remember when I first started 3D modeling, I was using 3ds Max, and I thought a lot of it was really just self-taught and watching a ton of tutorials on the internet of how people created, I guess, environmental art or anything like that compared to just pieces of concept art or real images. And there was a real process to it. It wasn't just dragging a box around on a screen. It required just like a deep understanding of, I guess, the depth of shapes and understanding how there's different edges and bevels and the depth. And there was just really a lot to it more than just moving things around. And even to your second point on UV mapping, which I guess for if people don't know what that is, it's literally just taking a shape and unwrapping it into a flat image that people paint over to draw textures on. So I think it's gotten a lot more simple since that. I know that Unreal Engine 5 was just announced, and I suppose there's just discussions on it being a much easier engine to develop 3D art with. Is this something you kind of see the industry moving towards in the future, where it just becomes a really seamless process for artists to develop art for games?
I think in general that we're seeing a lot of softwares that are like new and innovative and like game changers, so to speak. And with Unreal dropping in and like with the new cool features, I guess like for Unreal, like yeah, you can now then have more high fidelity meshes. Like you can probably just make a high poly, which is basically what you use for movies. But for games, because it's real time, you can't have that many polys calculating at the same time, which is why we make like a low res version, and then we have to like bake the high resolution details to the low res and fake a lot of things to make it look like the real thing in a simple, like to put it simple. And with Unreal dropping this, that means that we're getting closer to the movie industry, basically. And increasingly, like the game industry is moving closer and closer to that. Like, yeah, I guess that the amount of tech and just realism that we can pour into it. So we're getting more and more like less limitation because of technical issues. So I think like a couple of years ago, I think it's like 3 years ago, Substance dropped their tool that you can actually paint in 3 dimension, like you can actually paint on the model, which meant that, oh, does this mean we don't have to unwrap anymore? Well, it's more technically complicated. You still have to unwrap and you still have to have an UV, but I guess the requirements for it is not as like intricate. Like you don't have to do like put the seams so the player don't see where you have cut the space up, and you don't have to be as tedious with the work in there. But it didn't mean that the UV was completely removed, but it meant that now you can paint on the model directly instead of trying to flatten it out, as you explained with the UV, and trying to make a 2D image that then wraps around the 3D space again. So it becomes easier. And with Unreal now, the question is like, okay, so if you can have higher resolution models, still what would that mean for like if you then want to do destruction on it? Can you then have real-time destruction on these models because they're so heavy with like millions of polygons? So then it becomes like, okay, can you do then real-time simulations like that? And how does that work then with animation and other things? So it's like maybe we can have it closer to the movie industry, but it might be the thing again that people speculate that, okay, this is going to disappear now, but you know, it's going to make our life easier for sure, but it's probably still going to be some technical things that we still need to think about.
Yeah, I think what the community sees at least is that from the description of Unreal that everyone's job as a game developer is going to be a lot easier. But I think to your point where you mentioned the destruction of models in game, you have to really consider, okay, well, I can create a very high poly model, but then am I going to have to create a bunch of separate high poly models for that if I want destruction? I guess there's just a lot of questions to be had for that. And in your own experience, at least, have you noticed your job becoming easier as games have become more graphically impressive, or has it become a lot more difficult?
I think in a technical standpoint, it's becoming easier, and it's also noticeable with the more like diverse pool of people applying for like the game industry. There's like it's easier to get into as well because
Really?
it's the technical like stuff that was really technical now are more hidden underneath, and it's like automation, like you can click a button instead of doing all of these things manually. But then again, also that means that there's a higher demand as well from the players, that the game need to look in a certain way, or you need to have this and this. And if a company maybe pours in, like, say that everything is dynamically destructive in their game, they're gonna expect that from the other company to do the same with their game. So it's always like the competition bar or rank is like rising all the time. So I think like even if it becomes maybe like a bit easier technically for us to develop certain things, like the demand and also the bar is also being risen quite a lot.
I've noticed that the creative field is very difficult to break into just due to the sheer volume of people trying to get into the industry. But lately, you see people kind of moving away from formal education at universities to just teaching themselves how to program or how to animate or how to create 3D models, because the material and resources are available on most websites. You can find tutorials on YouTube on how to do these things. So do you think getting into the game industry or even the creative industry requires a lot of coursework, or do you still think that people can just teach themselves how to do these things and just have a really substantial portfolio to get into companies like this?
I think for sure you can be self-taught, and there's a lot of like really talented people out there. I see a lot of like new, I guess, stars all the time on the internet, like because it's you can find artwork in almost any platform nowadays as well. You can express yourself, you can show your things, but as you said, like a lot of things are available, which wasn't really the case before. It was hard to get like information on a lot of these things, and it's not like Unreal Engine existed in the way it did before, or like the tools we're using. Blender is like 3D modeling software, and and it's like it's easier to come over resources by yourself, so you don't really need that education, I guess, in that sense, unless you're not that self-disciplined enough to actually do it and put in the hard work by yourself. Then it's great to go on an education. The other thing though is that if you are part of an education, whether it be university, college, or vocational education, most of them offer the opportunity to help you find an internship somewhere. And that's the big difference, because company usually then team up with educations, because they know that students have been going through a set amount of like courses and have a base knowledge that they can guarantee that they have because they follow this program, which means that you will then take an intern from like a school that okay, they know all of these things, so they get quicker into the work that is required, which means that those are the people who will get the job. While if you're self-taught, you can't guarantee that this person has gone through exactly the same steps or courses or have the same base knowledge, even if you have a portfolio. And also, there's some laws in some like countries that you can't have people working without having some kind of income. And in Sweden, for example, you can take a student loan, and you also get money from the government when you're studying, which can guarantee that the person will actually have an income of some sort. But if you're self-taught, you can't have that. So then you can't guarantee that the person can, survive during the time they're having an internship before they get hired. So it's like a lot of factors, and it looks different in every country. But most companies will hire from schools directly because of like the collaboration and also the guarantee that they have the knowledge that they need. So it's going to be harder for someone that is self-taught to break into the industry, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible. It's just going to be a bit harder because you're going to have to look for that first, junior position and get hired immediately.
It sounds like a very different process. It's not as though one is more impossible than the other. It's just that if you go through a program to become a game developer, you have the added benefit of having a curriculum that's centered around what the game industry looks for, and you have the added benefit of networking with those companies like you mentioned. To that point though, in your own experience, if you've ever had to apply for a company outside of doing an internship directly into being hired, what do companies kind of look for in terms of 3D art? If they're looking at your portfolio, are they trying to check off a specific list of credentials on your portfolio?
So it depends on, like, of course, the company. So I can't really speak of, like, there's not really, a common ground for this process and what people look for. It's going to vary a lot. Like 3D art at one company can be that you do like weapon, vehicle, character, environment, a little bit of everything. While in other companies you will specialize them maybe and only make weapons. So for them it would be crucial that you can do weapons. So they might not want to see that you make a character because that's beyond what they are interested in anyway. So, and then you have smaller companies where you're going to have to do a little bit of everything, including then animation and lighting and rigging, or like other fields than just 3D, the pure like creation of it. So it's sometimes I get a lot of students that ask me about like how should I tailor my portfolio, and that's the thing, that you have to look at what type of games are they making, what type of role are you interested in, and what type of like size of the company are you interested in applying for. And like, yeah, you have a lot of people you can look at on the internet, of course, as well. But then again, you should also just compare yourself to other people on the same level as you that are hired like for that junior first entry position. So when I also look at someone's portfolio, I don't only look at them to see like, oh, is this like the best looking piece of art ever? Because, a lot of people do great art, and it's harder and harder to actually see like a difference in quality because you have all of these softwares and tools to help you with that one button click as well. So it's becoming more increasingly important to see if they actually understand the tech behind it and how you optimize for a game. Because we are making games still, even though like the art is getting closer to like movies and they're getting more and more realistic, you still have to do the optimization for it to run in real time. So for me, it's crucial to see like, do you know what that actually mean, or is it that you can create a nice piece of art, but it might have been better suited for like a movie? So do you know all of those technical requirements that are implied for making a game?
Right. It goes beyond the visual aspect of the model. It really kind of goes down to the workflow and making sure that the individual really understands that although the model should look good, it should also be technically sound to function in that game engine, because if it's too high poly or if it's unoptimized, it's not going to function well. So you don't really understand the workflow of translating a concept into a model into a game engine realistically. And I think that's a really important aspect of it, especially as game engines are becoming more technically advanced, and I guess the visual aspect is increasing, but so is the technical foundation of those engines.
Yeah, and also I think that it's been a lot of discussions about like photo scanning and so on as well, and photo scanning is always going to beat someone like making that by hand and looking at it, you know, like
What
creating
is
it from
photo
scratch.
scanning exactly?
Photo scanning is that you can scan pieces of real world data. So you basically take photos, say of like a telephone pole or something, and you do that in like a 360 angle degree, and then you can translate those photos into a 3D model. So the computer calculates the pictures and make a 3D model for you with the necessary inputs that you need for like displaying the color, like how it shines, if it's like metallic or if it's non-metallic, which means that you can basically go out and capture anything outside and then, you know, computer calculate it, which means that certain type of assets is not really necessary to make by hand, because, you know, taking a picture of something is going to do the job better than someone who will then go and make it by hand, usually. So that I've like raising the question how, like, if 3D artists would be out of a job, but that's not going to be true, because how are you going to make that alien planet? Because
Exactly.
you don't really have that. So it will only be true for certain things like rocks and, you know, piece of asphalt or something like that. But I think it's like also like a game changer that pushes for the like knowing more technical things than just creating art, because when we automate things and can computer calculate and even procedurally generate like entire maps with terrain and trees and stuff, it becoming like less and less significant that you can make those trees or sculpt a piece of terrain by hand, because the computer take care of it, which means that you need to have the knowledge to, you know, manipulate that instead, which is like more technical, I guess. So I think we will see that you are going to like it's going to be required to be more technical in your day-to-day job than like before.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine that being the case, and it's kind of striking that balance between an advanced engine and having that technical understanding of how to implement 3D art into that engine. In terms of your daily work, how would you describe kind of your role and what it is that you do on a daily basis?
Wow, yeah. I do a lot of different things, and my role that I have now being a lead is very different from when I was a 3D artist, when I was creating more art or technical things. Being a lead is also like people management and planning and scoping for what goes into a product, making sure that the team is aware on how we should like reach that target, whether it be technical or artistic, set out like benchmarks, and just in general how we are going to deliver whatever we're going to deliver, if it's like a new map or a piece of a new DLC or something like that. So it's, for me, being a lead, it's a lot of different things than it was before, and sometimes I have a hard time keeping track on all the things I'm doing actually myself, because it changes also around a year depending on where we are in the cycle. If we're in the beginning of a project or in the middle or in the end of a project, what my day tasks are, I guess. And it's also going to be different from a lead, perhaps, where I'm working right now, and a lead in another studio, because there's not really a standard for what a lead does either. So for me, at least, the biggest change now is that I do less art myself and teach more other people how to achieve what we are out to do, like for the game.
Is that something that interests you more now, moving from an actual artist role to a manager role, overseeing those artists?
I think it's interesting because, you know, obviously it's different from what I did before. It doesn't mean that I'm not an artist and not doing art. It just means that I have other responsibility in my day-to-day job than sitting down and doing art like from 9 to 5. So I always find it interesting to teach other people, and I do help out a lot of in educations. I usually get asked to come in for a day or be a course leader for like 5 weeks or so. And I find it very enjoyable to teach others, and to get to do that also part of my day job to like teach is quite fun. But I wouldn't like to do that like as a full-time job, be a teacher full-time. I think that's quite exhausting. But it's definitely like interesting. And if I have I've been working now for a while and sharing knowledge and just making sure that other people, students can get into the industry and get that support that I felt I was missing. If I can do that for other people, it just makes me happy.
I think that's awesome, being a teacher, though. I mean, going from being the artist yourself to kind of passing that knowledge along to your students and then having them kind of contribute in the bigger picture of the project. I think that's a really cool experience, though I have to agree. Doing the hands-on work as an artist is always an incredibly fun experience because it's allowing you to express your artistic expression in many cases.
Yeah, I'm still, as I said, doing that at work, but I'm doing so even more at home nowadays. Because I'm not doing it as much at work, which for me is totally fine, because that means that I get to do work on whatever I want to do as an artist.
Right.
And then I can express myself in other things. Like at DICE we work a lot with realism, and in my spare time then I sit and do a lot of like stylized things instead, because I find that very fun and relaxing. So
what is the process of turning things from concept art to game assets? Does that require a lot of communication between concept guys and the render individuals? And how are, I guess a sub question to that, how is most concept art created these days?
Well, I'm not a concept artist, but I guess like a concept art, it can either be like just a mood to set the general feeling for a game, like this is kind of what we're looking for. But it can also be specifically, this is what we're gonna build. So I guess there's different phases here. So you have like game designers who's then taking care of the mechanics of the game, making like, are we gonna jump, shoot, like do you have a quest, like what is it, the game actually, what we're gonna play. And then you have like level designers. They're the one taking care of like, okay, so we have this quest, but how do you get from point A to B, and like what obstacles are you meeting on the way? There's like there's a river here, or like are there gonna be any points where you have a pause and then you have more action again, like, and those are the ones taking care of that part, which means that of course there's going to be a lot of communication, because then the concept artists are gonna provide with this mood, general feeling of things. And once it's time and there's a prototype, usually like just white boxes everywhere in the game to get the feel like how you actually traverse in the level, then there's a matter of like, okay, how do you then translate this to 3D? And then you can have another type of concept art, which is like, okay, you take basically this boxy level and do a paint over, and okay, so this is what we're going to build more exactly then based on the boxy things. And then you kind of take the 3D artist into like, okay, so we're going to turn these boxes then into the 3D, but what are we actually building? And then you look at the concept, more detailed concept of what they want. And that's when you do like usually a white boxing pass, which in more detail explain the meshes, but you still need to, play test all the time to make sure everything is running and if it's fun. And of course, if you find that it's not going to be fun, you're going to have to, kind of iterate all the time. So it's not like you create a piece of like finished art immediately for a game. The game is usually in a white box state for a very long time while you're figuring out the fun in the game. And once that's more established, then you start doing the more detailed meshes for the game. Mm-hmm. And either it's enough with these more detailed like concept, like environment concept, or you might need even more. So like if it's a giant beacon or something and it needs to look in a certain way, then the concept artist can do like blueprints, like basically doing blueprints as for anything else that you would build in real life, or like if you're an architect, you do blueprints as well. Anything that helps the art, like the 3D art team, to translate things into 3D from a flat image.
You mentioned realism and how at DICE a lot of the work is based off realism. Now, in my own personal experience working with the Source engine, I remember working on a few games in the past, and although we used concept art to mock up and develop a lot of our 3D art, we had to rely on a lot of regular images of different things, from railings to boxes to doors, you name it, to kind of use as, I guess, the concepts for our 3D art. Would you say that's kind of the same at DICE, where although some work might require specific concepts that are, I guess, alien or fantasy related, would you say that you had to rely on real images of things to create a lot of the art in the game?
Yeah, I mean, we take a lot of references, like Google, taking pictures ourselves. Like, you're always gonna have to look at how the real world look like, specifically when it comes to material creation. Like, how does actually plastic look like, and how is the reflected surface on that to kind of convey it as actually looking like plastic or wood or whatever. And it also has to do with proportions and things like that. So there's always going to be a mix, and we can't get concept on everything. I can't like get a concept on every chair that is going to be in the game. I mean, I can still find a chair, and also we're still artists in the 3D team, so we can still make up our own chairs. It's just that the concept art people are more they are holding the bigger picture for how things are designed, and keeping the red thread running throughout the entire art direction. So it's more like it's like collaboration, as with any game. Like, it's all these different departments working together to make the game. So I mean, every means we could use to have like references, that's what we're gonna use. So
have you ever had any work that you kind of created during the life cycle of the project that didn't make it into the game?
Yeah, I worked on a title back in the day, like before I actually started working. I guess it was an internship, but then I also did some freelancing as well. And that game was canned, but it was completely done. Like, it you could release it. It was done.
Oh wow!
But they decided that it was not in line of like what the company wanted anymore, or like I guess the picture of the company didn't align with what type of games they wanted to release. So they scrapped the entire project.
Is that frustrating from the game developer perspective, kind of just putting in all that effort and resources into a game that could take years to make, and then during the final stretch of the project it's just canned and never released?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my experience back then, I didn't work on it for such a long time. I think I spent like 5 months or something doing freelance and stuff, and I got paid for my work and so on. And of course, it's sad to not see it released and other people to see what I did. But I think for me, I was more like, oh, okay, that's a shame. But I didn't pour years into it. But I know of people that poured like 5 years of their life into projects and they get canned.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see how that's probably way more frustrating than my 5 months. So I haven't really experienced that myself in that way, but I used to assume that if I would go every day to my job and then pour in like energy and like a lot of creativity and, you know, care, and then 5 years later it never sees the market, I think I would be very upset. Yes, it will feel I guess I will feel betrayed in a way.
Yeah.
Specifically if you can't show it to anyone.
And I think that's really like the important part of it. I mean, I think artists really want to share their art. They really want to show the world, you know, the things that they create and really what they're passionate about. So I think it means a lot to them when they're able to do that through the work they do in developing games. Going back to the art real quick, I had another follow-up question. You mentioned that you're a lead artist now, kind of working at a higher level. At DICE, is there kind of a tech art team working directly on one project at a time? Or do they just have an art team that kind of moves around and solves art problems for multiple projects at the same time?
Well, that's a very hard question because I'm not part of the tech art team, so I'm not really sure how the team in general is structured. I mean, we have a lot of people working at DICE, so, but I mean, I assume that I have similar structure as maybe the 3D art team, where if there's multiple projects, there will be multiple teams. Like you would divide the tech art then, as you would with the 3D team, into multiple to support the projects. If you have only one, then everyone will be on the same project. So it's like, yeah, the teams will always vary in size and the people working together at the same time.
I guess a follow-up question on this is a question I kind of received from a community member, and I don't recall ever hearing about this software product. It's called Houdini, and from the research I've done on it, it's an animation program for game development. Is that something that is part of the art pipeline of DICE?
So Houdini is like, it started with the movie industry, if I recall correctly. So it's more being used for movies to make VFX and all the cool like explosions and stuff you see in movies. And it also have proceduralism, where you can, like, if you create one house, it can generate like, I don't know, a gazillion different houses for you, or like indefinitely. So it's like, it's a very powerful tool in that sense, and it's been mostly used by the movie industry, and we've started to see it becoming part of the game industry as well because of the proceduralism, and also because you can do a lot of cool features with destruction, and I guess in a sense you can model in it, like 3D wise, but it's not really 3D modeling as someone who's doing 3D art would think about. But it's a quite technical program. It's like a node-based program, but you can also code in it. Wow. It's like usually working in the background, and most artists don't really open the program itself. It's like you have like a tools team perhaps making tools in it or doing things for the engine, and then like if you sit in Maya or 3ds Max, you can utilize those tools in those softwares, but it's running on the Houdini engine. So
is there a lot of demand for it these days? I know you mentioned that with Unreal Engine 5 coming out, a lot of companies are really moving towards that very photorealistic, high polygon count models in their games. I mean, it seems like Houdini really just aligns with that sort of move. So do you think there's going to be that increased demand over the next few years for that experience?
I know what a Houdini engine is, and I opened it and looked at it, and I get so confused every time I see it. But I like the people who can use it and actually make the things we need in it, and then make it artist friendly for another software. I mean, it increases like the velocity for the teams, but also like what happens in the background. So if you can have like the Houdini engine running and doing things in the background, it will like increase quality, but also like the time you have to spend on certain things that again like you maybe did manually before, but now you can do with a button click because someone made something amazing, a tool in it, and now you can just click a button and it does everything you had to do before.
I see.
So yes, we're probably gonna see more of it, and we are already seeing a lot more game companies use it for their games.
Yeah. Well, this is probably one of the cooler things I've saw about your work. It's that you've worked on games such as Horizon Zero Dawn, the Solus Project, and Battlefield 5, among other titles. And I was wondering, what has been kind of the best and worst parts about working on these games?
I love how you're asking me like all of these difficult questions. um, I mean, the best part for me always when creating games, regardless of the game, is that you create an experience that other people can enjoy. So if I can make something that other people can have fun with and just forget about reality for a while, that's amazing. But of course, there's always going to be difficulties or stress or other things when you're actually working on a project or tech that doesn't work and other things. But I can't really specifically pinpoint anything that is like, oh, this has been the worst part of it. Because I've been like enjoying my time with colleagues and friends on those projects. So yeah, I don't really have anything like worst about them.
Yeah, I think a better way to put it was if there, I guess, what has been the most challenging parts about working on these games. I mean, at least from my personal perspective on working on different games, I've noticed that some games are more realistic, whereas some games are more based on fantasy or futurism. And what I found to be the most exciting part about working on some of these games is that being able to work on a game that is very futuristic or fantasy focused, it allows you to express your artistic abilities in a more free and open way because you don't have to follow a strict reference model. Whereas if you're working on a realistic game, you kind of have to play within the structure of what does a lamp post look like? What does a TV look like? So I think that's kind of the more fun aspect of working on games that are in line with fantasy or futurism because it gives you the ability to be more free with your creativity, I guess.
Right. Yeah, well, I guess in that sense, like, I do know what you mean. For me, like, when I worked on Horizon Zero Dawn, or like when I was doing VR games, the Apex Construct it was called. Those two has probably creatively being the most fun. Like with Horizon specifically, because I mean it's the look of it is supposed to feel realistic, but the shapes in the game is like really wonky and weird. You know, you have those different tribes in there, and they have all their own like shape language and silhouettes, and like nothing really looks like it would be in our world, basically. But it's still supposed to be rendered more in the realistic manner. So that was really fun to work with the shape language and stuff. And for Apex Construct, the VR game, there we had like this like really loose we were going for like this more stylized art style, but the more challenging, I guess, if you would then put like what has been the challenging part, that was in VR, and VR has more technical limitation than like what you see in other games, because you will have to run it real time, but also like on a very, you know, small set of hardware and technique. So whatever like fancy and advanced things you can maybe do then with like a game for PC, you couldn't really do that for a VR game. And it's the same if you would work on a mobile game. It needs to run on the mobile phone, which means you can't really have the fancy things you have on the PC, right? So it felt like working on a mobile game in that aspect. Like, oh, I really want to do this. Oh, but it doesn't really run. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I think VR is really, really interesting. I know that Half-Life Alyx came out recently, and I'm a huge fan of the Half-Life games, and I think it was Valve's first VR AAA title. Excuse me. And I think a lot of companies are really moving into that direction with VR, but it does present some challenges, though, because although you have the added ability to kind of move in a free space, I think 3D artists really have to take into account that people are going to move models around in such a way where now you have to model the whole entire object, because if, for example, you can't usually see the front of an object, now the user is going to turn the object towards themselves, and you have to really consider the full shape of it now. And I think those are some of the complexities when developing in VR. But I think moving forward, the industry is going to be moving into that direction and start developing games on that sort of medium.
Yeah, it's been an interesting scene for a long time. I think now with VR and AR, like, it's been a lot of, like, the first headsets came out and people were like, oh, this is going to be the future. But it's also been quite stagnant in that way. Like, we haven't seen the explosion of it like we did with mobile games. Mobile games, like, took off in a, like, amazingly fast speed. Everyone has a mobile phone.
Yeah, I was surprised
everyone can
about
play.
that.
Yeah, but that means, like, everyone can play, even the people that you wouldn't expect to be playing games. But, like, with VR, like, the complexity there, it's been, like, you've been kind of required to have a very high spec PC and then also buy a headset for that PC.
It's expensive,
so
isn't it?
Yeah, and exactly, you have the cost to, like, having that, but you also need to have the interest of owning, like, a high spec PC. So it's like you getting yourself a little bit into a corner there, and then they were like, okay, but headset for PlayStation, which, more units sold when it, like, was released, so more people could play because it wasn't as expensive and a lot of people had a PlayStation. You didn't have to upgrade your graphics card or, like, parts of it. So then it became more easily accessible, which made it like a little jump. But unless you get that to run on, like, the platform everyone has, which is a mobile phone, you're probably not going to see that, taking off in that speed as we did with the mobile games. So I'm still sitting here, like, worked with VR games as well. I'm like, yeah, I'm still a bit of, like, waiting for that. And then they released, like, Valve released this Half-Life game. Well, like, in general, I was like, okay, well, now it's gonna take off, like, because it's Half-Life.
But we're still waiting.
Half-Life. Yeah, it's still waiting. Like, it hasn't really taken off in, like, what people probably have been speculating or expecting, and now it's been a couple of years. So I'm still, like, curious, is it gonna be this big new thing as everyone is talking about? This is the way we're gonna play games, or is it not really gonna happen? Because it feels like we are in a little bit like this, I don't know, middle right now, where it's like, not really everyone has a VR headset or can afford or have the possibility to play it. But then again, we see some cool tech improvements all the time. Like, you don't really need a hand controller anymore. You can play with your hands. So it's getting, like, to a very interesting place, but I'm still waiting for it, like, to happen, like, to take off. So
I think there's a lot of technologies out there that are very interactive, but have you seen any technologies personally that you think that the game industry is going to move towards, or do you think that the general projection is that you're going to have consoles become, I guess, improved in their processing and graphical processing output, and that's just going to be the way it is for the next generation? Or do you think there's going to be a technology out there such as augmented reality or virtual reality that's really going to take the industry in a completely different direction?
Well, it's very hard to speculate in, But as with anything that is becoming popular, sometimes it just happens overnight, right? And it can be very unexpected things as well, like a little bit with the mobile market. But I think like whatever people can, like in a way, that is affordable and accessible for like the most like part of the population, that is what's going to be the next thing. Because there's still a lot of people who don't have access to play games, and some people only have access to limited like mediums to play games, which is still why like mobile game is such a big hit, because most people can get a phone or a second-hand phone in some way and then play like simple puzzles or like, I don't know, other games that are more like high end as well. So I think it's really hard. I think what we're gonna see more of is like, how do you tie these people together? Someone who's playing on a PC that is playing on a phone that maybe is playing on Nintendo Switch or the PlayStation, because those people are gonna have want to play together. So I think we're gonna probably see more crossplay functions, or like with Steam streaming that we've been seeing from like Google and stuff with Stadia, that you don't necessarily need to own a unit, like you can stream from it instead.
I think that is
that would be the most accessible thing for people, right? You don't have to own anything, you can rent and then you can play. So
exactly, I think that's awesome. I think being able to open up the market to allow people who just don't have the money to spend on a really high-end PC, but give them the accessibility to get a platform like Stadia to be able to play those games, or to even have cross-platform play like you mentioned. And if I don't have a PC but I have a PS4 or PS5, I can still play these games with these people. And I think that's really what it's about. It's about really opening up the platforms to allow people to be able to play these games with each other, instead of kind of siloing it and kind of having exclusives for one system and everybody else is kind of just left out, outside the game.
Yeah, no, but it's interesting, like time at least. A lot of things that are coming at the same time or like being experimented with. So, yeah, I'm really curious about what it's gonna be, and if like streaming games is gonna be a thing as well.
In terms of kind of the games you've worked on in the past, have there been any that you kind of enjoyed working on the most? And what about them made them, I guess, fun to work on?
Yeah. I think I enjoyed working on all of the games. Just to have that said. But like other circumstances, like around, like not just working on the game, probably makes me think that the most fun and probably hardest time was when I was working at Guerrilla in Amsterdam, because I had to move country. So that was very interesting and a different experience, but it's also quite hard to leave your home, right? And different culture and stuff like that. So I think I really enjoyed working there on that game because of like the art style, and then also because of colleagues and people. But I also find it the most hardest part of like my career, because I had to leave what I had in Stockholm for a while, and just venture and try things on my own, which it's gonna be it's gonna either fail or succeed. And I think after that time I decided to go back to Stockholm, but I think it was a mixed experience, so it's probably gonna be one of the more memorable things I had done.
It sounds like a very interesting learning experience, really just kind of getting out of your comfort zone and going to someplace new and working for another company that I guess would be different from working where you're at right now at DICE. It's kind of, they do things differently, I'm assuming, and the projects they work on are completely different. You're in a new environment, so it's really just a kind of profound learning experience, and getting that different perspective about the game industry and how different companies work and the creative process that they have there versus working at DICE.
Yeah, and just like the cultural differences that I didn't think would be much of a difference, because like the Netherlands and Sweden is quite close, but it's still very different in a lot of regards. And you don't notice certain things when you move, like when you are a tourist compared to when you move somewhere. You're gonna experience complete different things, because you're gonna have to deal with a lot of things you don't when you're a tourist. So yeah.
Are there any cultural differences that really stood out when moving there to work at Guerrilla Games?
Yeah, I think like Swedish people tend to sugar code stuff, or like put it in a nice fluffy little sweet thing when they deliver feedback, or when you talk about hard things. You're like, yeah, there's like the middle way, or like we call it lagom in Sweden, and it's just like you don't want to offend anyone, but you don't want to like be unfair and not give the feedback. So it's like this little fluffy nice package. While in the Netherlands, they're very frank and forward. And for me, it was very hard in the beginning to not take it personally. If someone is like, this is bad, or this looks like shit, they don't literally mean that you necessarily are bad or you are shit. It's just, yeah, they didn't really put it in a nice sugar package that I am used from by growing up here. So I guess that was the biggest difference, like for me, like just being very frank and forward. And after a while, I actually appreciated it, because it goes way faster to get to the point than the other way around, where it sometimes nowadays can be a bit annoyed sometimes, going like, okay, gonna have to deliver this sugar package, or when someone else is sugar packaging something for you, you're like, yeah, just get to the point, please.
Yeah, that's night and day experiences right there, going from having that freeing conversation versus someone just sugarcoating the feedback they have for you. And I think it's really, really important just to have that feedback in front of you, but it has to be conveyed in a way that isn't going to be like, you suck and the work you made is terrible. That's
yeah.
I
it needs to be constructive.
Exactly.
But I guess in this case, I kind of experienced like two extremes. So it's like, yeah, that was the biggest difference, at least in the working point for me.
In terms of kind of the technical aspect of it from an artist's perspective, did you notice there to be a huge difference in the industry's tools and standards from Guerrilla Games to DICE, or were they both kind of using the same types of software like Maya or 3ds Max and whatnot?
I think like there is a set of like industry standard softwares in general, regardless of where you work. And then there's going to be this game changer, right, that lands on the table that everyone is going to start chasing and start using as well. So I don't necessarily think it was a big difference between just necessarily like those two companies, because I worked in other companies in between as well. It was more like, I think it's that it becomes a transition for everyone to which software they're going to use the next, because there's of course competition between softwares as well about, okay, what is the newest thing, and a lot of people developing things at the same time. So there was like the next texturing software, would it be Quixel or would it be Substance? And as far as I know, a lot of people now use Substance, and Quixel still exists, but not maybe in the like industry standard sense, still being used. And then it was the same thing with like 3D modeling tools. Modo suddenly like became the upper hand, and then it was like a switch, but it didn't necessarily become like, okay, everyone is going to use Modo, but it became a split that some companies are now using Maya or 3ds Max or using Modo. And now we have the same thing again. Blender is becoming the new thing. So then it's like someone is going to have to take the step, and some companies have then just decided, okay, we're going to go with Blender. And then it becomes like, oh, wait, they're using Blender. Are we going to make the switch as well? Like, is there any benefits? And, making a software switch from having a standard is also very costly. You have to kind of teach everyone how to use it. And get to the same speed that you could with other things. So it's gonna have to be like kind of this scale, you know, is it worth it or not? And sometimes it is worth it to change, and sometimes it's like, it doesn't really, you know, gain that much, but maybe we should look into it. And
Has
then
it
it become, yeah.
has it been a challenge for you to kind of have to learn different software platforms? Because for me, I've always just used 3ds Max, and my impression was that every single software package did the exact same thing. Like if you went to Blender, or if you went to Maya or Rhino 3D or 3ds Max, they all do the same exact thing. So why would I guess a game developer really need to switch between them?
In my experience, I've been using the softwares that's been standard in the company. So I've been using, like I started out with 3ds Max and then it became Maya.
Mm-hmm.
I've been using Quixel, I've been using Substance, ZBrush, Mudbox, like whatever they feel that they're using. And it might look similar, but the software is like fundamentally they do the same thing. The way you approach the tool, like the software and work with the tools might be different. And some companies integrate softwares as part of their engine for like, you know, fast like transition between the softwares, or just like quicker input, or having the tools from the engine into the software. And some software allows for that easier than others. So in a sense, like if you then have to do certain actions in a software and they have it integrated with the engine, it would be beneficial for you to then use that software than doing it in another software. So usually, like for me, it's never been an issue to transition in softwares. It can be a little bit like, oh, okay, so you do it this way. Well, I would have preferred it to do it like the other tool, but it's basically, I see it like choosing your hammer. If you're a carpenter, do you want to have this rubber hammer or this metal hammer? I'm probably gonna prefer one or the other, but they do the same thing. They're gonna get that nail into the wall.
Right.
It's just a preference, but also maybe someone did something with the other hammer to make it easier to use.
I see.
For
That's
whatever
interesting.
the end. Yeah, so I think if you choose to like be in part of the game industry and work in it, you're going to have to transition to new softwares or tools all the time. Like it's an ever-changing industry. So whatever was something yesterday is not going to be the same today nor tomorrow. So it's always going to be a learning experience, or like just, you know, journey. And I think that's also one of the negative sides, that it's one of the more fun things, because you're going to always have to learn new things, and I think that's fun. But you also need to stay constantly up to date, otherwise you're going to be outdated. So it's almost like a race as well, which can be exhausting. So
Yeah, I think that's important. I think a lot of technologies are changing every day, really, and companies are constantly moving from one thing to the next, and everybody has to keep up. One of the most common questions I was asked going into this conversation with you was, what kind of software does your guest use? What is the industry standard for software packages for artists and animators? And I think the reality is that you're pointing out is that there isn't really a standard, because it's constantly changing, and game developers are always looking at what they have right now, looking at what other game developers are using, and really determining what is the next best thing to use, right?
yeah, and what I usually advise someone who's learning or is a student is to not look at the softwares and be like, okay, I need to learn this software, and then this software, and then, you know, learn all the 3D softwares. Learn the fundamentals of like what 3D modeling is and why you do things. Then it's just a matter of picking your tool. It shouldn't matter which tool someone gives to you, like as long as you have the fundamentals there and know what you're doing. You basically do that in another program, but it's going to be called something else in that program probably. But you know what you're looking for, so it's going to be easy to find it, and you know what the function does. So it's like, I feel that sometimes people think that, oh, if I learn Maya, I'm going to get a job. It's more like, if you learn 3D modeling, you're going to get the job. The rest you will learn on the company. So if I get hired somewhere where they're using then Rhino or Modo and I don't know it, but I still think my skill set is good and like what I know and can be applicable, and they're looking for that type of talent or knowledge, they are going to let me get time to, teach myself the program that they are using. Or sometimes they even have licenses for other softwares because they know people are using them as well. So it's not a matter of like, oh, if I know these softwares, I will get the job.
It's really just understanding the fundamentals. It's understanding the fundamental basis or foundation of what 3D modeling and 3D art is. And then from there, you can really just use any platform that you need because you understand how all of those work.
Yeah, it's the same for animation. Do you know how to animate? Yes, well, then you should be able to use an animation tool. Even if you have a preference, and that's fine to have a preference, but you need to know the fundamentals of animation and how like the motion is and how you actually move a character or like the environment or something like that. Then whatever you're using to achieve that shouldn't really matter as much. So it doesn't really matter if you see industry using Maya or Modo for that, and you then want to go and create your own portfolio, just use a free software like Blender. That's fine. Create your portfolio, make something, cool or amazing, like, or speaks for like what you are interested in. You will learn the tools when you're in the company. Yeah.
A question that I frequently see about the industry, and I've noticed this myself with certain companies, is if assets tend to be reused from one game to another by companies. I mean, from my personal experience, I noticed that Valve has done this, and I think Activision has done this with some of their games, where they'll have assets in one game, and then in a sequel, they'll have similar assets that are retextured. Is that something that's commonly done in the industry?
I think it will depend and vary from company to company where the pipeline and workflow is. But I mean, you will find that, and if that's part of the pipeline, they will maybe reuse something and then retexture it. And that's all about like what is it that, the bang for the buck when it comes to like selling the game. Is it to have new models for everything, or is it to actually deliver the game experience? So if you can reuse a rock, why not do that? And then, focus on the things that actually matter for the game. Unless this rock is really important, maybe it's, maybe you will rework it and do it like into something else with the rock. But it's like you have other things like assets you can actually buy as well. There's a lot of like 3D stores where you can buy, like with Unreal, they have like an Epic now that if you use Unreal, you get the Megascan assets for free. And all of those are like photo scan assets. So you will probably see that rock in a lot of different games, even if they are not from the same, company, because they are a free asset that they provide if you use Unreal Engine. So you'll probably find a lot of things like that. So, and as I said, if the rock is important, they will probably do something more with it to make it stand out. But they're probably going to focus on the things that actually matters. Maybe the, new cool character or a centerpiece of the environment rather than that rock. So
one of the things, I know we're kind of shifting topics here, and I wanted to kind of get to this. Game design seems like it would be a field that's typically male dominated, and it might be different culturally from one country to another, I believe. Is that something you've kind of noticed, or are customs in a country such as Sweden different in that regard, where it's more common for women to be involved in the creative area of game design specifically?
I think, as you already pointed out, that's different from like country to country because of culture and customs and stuff like that. I think when it comes to Sweden, where we have like maybe more of like this equalness in general in society. So you will see more women's in like technical fields in general. That said, though, it's still very male dominated, and it's not like 50-50 at all in like the companies or like culture wise. But I mean, that doesn't mean that there's no women's or like not any women's on high position and so. It's just, I think is a more complex thing than that, and just like see if there's, diversity in the industry. I think what's going to have to happen is that, since early childhood, you're going to have to, help people that might be from, a diverse background to get to know or be more interested in, like, that you can actually work with games.
Mm-hmm.
Most female people I meet, or like women's, or, people who identify as a woman, don't even know that you can work in the game industry. They get surprised when I tell them what my work is.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them would be like, oh, I love to game. If I had known that, I would have totally tried to pursue a career like that. So I think it's just like, there's a lot of factors that play a part here when it comes to like how diverse a workplace is. But unfortunately, I mean, it's getting better, but it's not, there yet.
Mm-hmm. The thing that really stood out to me is that you're also the co-founder of an organization called Gamedevforce, which is working towards increasing diversity and bolstering equality for minorities within the game industry. And I find that to be extremely fascinating and really important, especially in today's day and age with, the recent world news going on about a lack of equality and just lack of diversity in work environments, and even just societally, there's a lack of cultural inclusion. Can you kind of share a bit more about the organization and the work you're doing to bolster equality and increase diversity?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. So Gamedevforce is a non-profit organization that me and Linnea and Jenny was like, we made this organization together because we had a lot of things going on at the same time, doing different things for like diversity. Like me being very much involved in education, I for me, not just being an educator and teaching, but then to show that as a woman you can actually pursue this as a career. I think it's important to, have figures that, if you go there and be in an education, to show that, hey, you can also do this just by being there and being different and represent like a minority. But then you also had like Linnea and Jenny doing a lot of different other things, like having introduction to game nights, and they had like game jam initiatives like that focus on like minorities, like having a group of people, like in this particular case, because we're all women, we know a bit more about that subject and how it feels, and have those women come together and then just have like a 2 weeks game jam together. So there's like a lot of different things that we did on the side separately, and then we thought, instead of like doing all of these things separately, why don't we work together, because then we can do way more things. So then we created Gamedevforce, and what we've been doing recently is having conferences where we invite people, where we focus on like the speakers representing a minority, but not just speaking about maybe hardship or what to do about it, but actually doing something about it. So for us, it's like taking these cool people working in the industry that are representing a minority, but have them speak about their expertise on the like stage, and showing that doesn't matter where you come from, you can be really skilled and have the expertise for this regardless, and just be like this beacon of light for maybe someone who's like, oh, I can identify with that. And then we kept going with these game jams, focusing on not just like getting more women into the game, but also keeping more women in the games, because it's like common that people drop off after a while, and we wanted to like make sure that you can then come together in a safe environment and then bring back the spark, because there's a lot of things like women have to go through when they are in different workplace, like a lot of negativity, or just like facing male colleagues that might not have been nice, or being sexually assaulting them and stuff, and so there's a lot of people who leave. So we took people from around the world and had a game jam in north of Sweden, so people from the States and like Poland and like different parts of Europe that have been working in the industry for like between 2 or 15 years, and just, you know, make games together and then figure out like what is it that makes it fun for you. And, you know, just being in this minority group, and a lot of them realize that, you know, they can express themselves in a different way by being with people that are similar to themselves, even if it's just by gender, and then bring that back to the company to help other women and, you know, what they experienced. So yeah, like in general, for me and for them, it's important to just try to help other people, you know, get into the industry, but then stay and also feel safe, but also educate that you can be an ally and what to look out for, like if you see someone having a hard time in your workplace. So yeah, I guess in a sense we're working a lot of like with just in particular like questions for women and non-binary and anyone who's like identifying with that. We are also looking into like if we can have other people help out with like other questions that they are more like experienced with, but you know, sometimes it's a bit harder, and especially now during this time where a lot of people are staying at home, or like just you know, this current situation in the world is harder to do these initiatives, so we're trying to find virtual space instead through Discord, or like having lunch but virtually, and having these like groups.
Do you think that's kind of a challenge? I know you mentioned earlier that keeping individuals engaged with the organization was a challenge over time. Do you think that having social distancing also increases that challenge? And has your organization tried using platforms like Twitch or Discord or anything like that to really keep people together and to plan, I guess, sort of events or game nights or I guess conferences through those platforms as a means to share information with a greater group of people?
We've definitely been looking into it, but like the organization is totally on our own spare time. So it's like whatever energy we would have left, you know, by the regular day, but also like through daily life, that's when we spend like our time with the organization. So it's like sometimes hard, you know, sometimes you find yourself in a more stressful environment or place in life, then it's harder to get that time or energy. And I think during this very particular time that is right now, it's taking a toll on like everyone, but we are definitely like trying to organize at least through the group we already have, women in games section of the Gamedevforce, where we have game nights and lunches virtually on Discord. But we haven't really had any time to plan more than that, to go on Twitch and stuff, which is why I'm doing things on Twitch on my own right now, which I've been doing anyway for the past 2 years, but for like engaging students more and just being there to have someone they can talk to or ask question about the game industry. But in general, more than that, we haven't looked into it for now, at least.
It seems like you've brought together an extremely diverse, I would say, group of people from all over the world. And I'm curious as to what would you say has kind of been the greatest experience or lesson from this organization and from working with all of these different people? Has there been, I guess, one single thing that really just stood out to you most?
I think just like it's a reward, you know, to see other people succeed. And I think that's also something we in general agree on, that if we can help other people, that in itself gives a lot of positive energy back. And I think by everything we've done so far with like conferences or game jams, lunches and other things, it's always stressful and, you know, a hardship to pull together all of these things, especially when you barely have resources to do so on your spare time. But in the end, it's always rewarding when people, you know, go away with a smile, or just, you know, when you see someone maybe a year later and they be, you know, tell you that I went to one of your events and that's what made a change for me, like I'm working with this now, or I got into the industry thanks to like the things that you arranged. And, you know, just knowing that we can be helpful and you know, remove hardship and struggle that we think are unnecessary for people to experience. So yeah.
I think it's absolutely incredible what you and your team and your organization as a whole are doing, especially in a time like this where it is absolutely more important than ever to promote diversity and collaboration and include everyone, no matter what your background is, your beliefs, what you look like. It doesn't matter. I think it's absolutely important to inspire that and to bring people together. And I'm curious if people out there want to kind of get involved with the work that you and your organization at Gamedevforce are doing right now. How can they go about doing that?
So we do have a website, gamedevforce.com. That leads also to our Facebook group. So you can either like email us on that mail, or you can contact us through our Facebook group. And there is a lot of different things. It's all from people who want to help out, or, you know, sometimes we also have people reaching out because they have struggles, and that's totally fine for us to do as well, to just sit down and talk or just have a chat if there is anything. But yeah, the easiest way is to reach us on our website, I would say. We do have Twitter as well, but it's like with all social media, I think it's easier to just go straight to the website. You'll find the links to everything there.
Well, I think this is awesome what you and your organization are doing, and I'll be sure to check it out, and I'm going to have to add this to the description on the podcast because I'm really going to encourage everybody to check this out and support the organization, because it's just really important, the work you're doing, and I admire what you're doing with this. With that said, I think we're close to closing the episode, but before we do, I usually end with a list of 5 quick fire questions or so, in which my guests will typically just answer how they best see fit, or, you know, what they think, and it doesn't have to be a long answer. So that said, I'll just jump into the first question of the closing section of the show. Kim, what would you say has been your favorite part of being a game designer?
Ooh, my favorite part is to do something that I love. That's the short answer. To every day, to be able to be creative and just, you know, give an experience to other people. That is the best part.
Are there any misconceptions or myths about the industry that kind of stand out to you?
I think in general, like, what you would see often happen is people being mad that something happened in a game, or maybe, you know, they didn't push an update or whatever, and that they immediately go to blame and don't think about that there's actually a lot of people working and putting a lot of, like, you know, blood, sweat and tears into a product. And a lot of these people are, you know, doing it as a living, and it's not in any mean meant to be offensive to anyone, or, you know, a particular, like, oh, we did this because we hate the game or whatever. That's never the case. But it feels like sometimes you see in YouTube comments or any other platform just nasty things, and you go, yeah, it stinks, you know, because we are all just trying to make a fun and nice experience for everyone, and that can sometimes be really frustrating to see that people think that it's, people are evil, that's why you do things. It's like, okay, well, that's never been the case. So, yeah.
What one piece of advice would you give to someone who is interested in getting into the game industry?
I think do some research. Like, what do you want to do? Do you want to go and do programming, music? Do you want to do art? What type of art? Like, look into what the different sections. I think a common mistake is that people think that they're gonna do everything. But if you spend like an hour in everything and someone spends like hundreds hour in one thing, they are gonna be the one who get the job in the end, because they put the most hours into one specific area while you've been spending a lot of hours in different areas.
What would you say has been, or who would you say has been the biggest influence to you, whether it's been a specific individual or any sort of video game or pop culture reference or artist? Has there been one that really stood out to you as an influence?
For me, Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Zelda, has been like my biggest inspiration, and also those games have been like part of my life that made me want to pursue a career in games.
If you had the resources to start developing your own video game, what would it be?
Oof. I think for me, co-op games are really, it's my love. If to experience a game together with someone else, I think, like, rather than like what type of game are you going to make, I would focus on making co-op games, like things you can experience together with your friends, not like multiplayer, but like smaller, like group experience, because that's the thing I enjoy most myself, to play something together with others.
Yeah. So, Kim, that will really do it for this episode, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show. I love that you shared your different experiences of working in the game industry, what it's like working in the game industry, your experiences with the organization Gamedevforce, and the work that you are all doing to make the world a better place. So for people interested in kind of just learning more about you and your work, or following you on social media or even Twitch, how can they do so?
Well, they can look for my name, Kim Aava, or my nice nickname that I use on Twitch then, which is Aava-chan. So I'm on Twitter, Instagram, ArtStation, Twitch, YouTube. Just pick your place. I'm most active on Twitch though, so that's probably where you're gonna find me the most. So that's Aava-chan. It's basically my last name, and then the Japanese suffix chan.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. So I will make sure to share the links to the social media platforms and your website, Patreon, as well as ArtStation and Gamedevforce in the description of the episode. If people are interested in checking that out, I highly encourage everyone to do so. And again, I really do thank you so much for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure, Kim.
Well, thank you yourself. It's been really fun, and I hope you continue doing an amazing work and bringing some interesting stories to people.
Well, thank you very much. And that will do it for this episode of the All Things Interesting podcast. And thank you so much for tuning in.
Energy is a timeless force.